On paper, both low G and high G tunings for the ukulele appear the same. After all, you are using the same technique to play them, right? Well, not quite. Those 5 notes, the G, G sharp or A flat, A sharp or B flat, and B make all the difference to your sound, to music theory, and even how you use your intuition to play the instrument. Is any one tuning better than the other? No. That's why you should have both tunings available to you and understand the differences. But if you're like me and play only one instrument, which one should you pick? And why? Hello friends, and welcome to this exciting first episode of Ukulele Sessions, a long-form ukulele show where we dig deep and get nerdy on anything and everything ukulele related. My name is Mustafa, and this is MK Fingerstyle Academy, where all the cool ukulele fingerstyle content is happening right here, right now. Let's get into it. So, when talking about the difference between low G and high G, the most obvious starting point is the register. Both tunings have the note G on string 4, or the lowest string. It is the same note, but not the same pitch or frequency. They are an octave apart. High G is an octave higher than low G, which makes your lowest note the C note, or string 3. Versus in low G, your lowest note is the G below the C, which is 5 notes lower. You have B, B flat or A sharp, A flat or G sharp, and G. So to give you a visual representation, imagine your ukulele as a singer, and this singer has a voice. And because the ukulele is a polyphonic instrument, in other words, it can produce more than one voice at the same time, you have 2 or 3 singers available to you. But to keep things simple, imagine you have 2 singers. In low G, because of the lower register, you have a bass and a soprano and all the range between them. We call this SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. While in high G, your lowest note is the C, so your range is really limited to tenor to soprano, with no bass. Now, having more range doesn't mean it's better, it just means you have more range if you need it. See, music is about tools and effects, and sometimes more range doesn't mean the effect that you need or the tool that you need for your project. Low G will have more bottom end to it, while high G will sound brighter and thinner. So now that we've discussed the range, what do those 5 extra notes that the low G has mean when it comes to music theory? Low G tuning gives you the root chord of 5 more notes than high G tuning. In case you don't know what root chords are, don't panic, I have it all covered in my ukulele fretboard harmony course, so make sure to check that out if you're interested in theory. But in a nutshell, root chords have the note of the chord at the bottom of it. So for example, in G major, you have notes G, B, and D, and the root is G. So root chord of G major will have the note G at the bottom of the chord, or in other sense, it would be the lowest note in that chord. If you replace the bottom chord with another chord tone like B or D, then you end up with an inversion. This is important because root chords are the most stable versions of a chord, and if you don't play the root at the bottom and instead play another note, in other words, an inversion, that is less stable in harmony. Now, more or less stability doesn't mean good or bad, it's just a different effect of music that you need to be aware of and be conscious when creating, arranging, or performing. And to be honest, you can only hear the difference between this stability once you put the chords together in context and listen carefully for it. A stable chord traditionally would be used to announce the beginning or the end or some big moment that's happening in the music, like a modulation. If music was speech, think of your root chord at the end like a period, while an inverted chord could represent movement, uncertainty, and it's a great place to use if you want the piece to keep rolling without coming to a stop. If the root chord was a period, the inverted chord would be more of a comma. So low G gives you more root chord options, but can you use inverted chords in place of root chords? Well, of course you can. Just be aware of the effect it produces and be conscious of what it does to your song. Now, if you know your history, you would know that certain periods of music were very strict about music theory and their rules. You would know that in certain locations you would have to use root chords, otherwise it wouldn't be acceptable. For example, certain cadences had to have the root chord in order for it to resolve. And if you didn't do that, let's just say it was frowned upon. So playing low G ukulele will give you more opportunities to play music properly, or dare I say more authentic when it comes to representing the period. But sticking to the idea of root chords, some of the most popular chords on the ukulele with the easiest shapes are inverted chords. Just think about your F chord, C chord if you play the 4th string, your D minor and D major movable shapes, or the E flat major movable shape chord. So if some of the most popular chords on the ukulele are inverted anyways, does it really matter? Does the difference between root chords and inverted chords really matter? Well, yes, it does. We're gonna have to get a little bit nerdy here, but it's only gonna be for a minute. See, back in the day, and by that I mean 500 years ago, the Renaissance guitar was the ukulele equivalent at its time. It was of a similar size and had 4 strings like the ukulele. But its 4th chorus, which is the equivalent of the 4th string on the ukulele, had both low G and high G tuning, which is different from strings 3, 2, and 1, which were tuned to unisons. If you don't know what that means, it means strings 1, 2, and 3 had 2 strings, both of them tuned to the same pitch, while string 4 had a low G and a high G, in other words, the octave, tuned for both strings. And what is more interesting here is that the low G was strung first, and then it was the high G. So what happens is that when you play in fingerstyle and pick the 4th string, you would hear the low G first, and then hear the after effects in the high G, depending on how you strike it. And if you strum, the high G would be tucked inside between the bottom end and the higher end. And the reason they did that is because when you play the low G and sort of hear the high G at the same time in a strumming or fingerstyle context, it rounds off the stark effect of having an inverted chord in a culture that was expecting the root chord. If this is getting too nerdy or too specific, it is okay, don't panic. You don't really need to understand this. But what you do need to know is that back then, at that time, certain rules of music were expected to be followed. And if you didn't, it was sort of a big deal. So if you think about it, the Renaissance guitar was a rebellious instrument, sort of like how the ukulele is in modern time. And there is history behind that rebellion. But let's leave that story for another day. So now we know that using low G and high G at the same time smoothens out the stark effect of the inverted chord. Let's go back and answer the original question. So the original question was, if you're playing inverted chords anyways, instead of the root chords, does it make a difference which tuning you're in? After all, the inverted chords are less stable. So what's the difference between low G and high G? They're not root chords anyways. Does it really matter? Well, the answer is yes, it does. See, in low G tuning, the inverted chord is more properly spaced out than its counterpart, the high G, where the notes are more compressed. Looking at the music notation will make this a lot clearer. Here you have a G major chord in root position. Notice how the notes are spaced out. Now, here's what it looks like in high G. Notice how the vertical space is now more compressed. So to make this easier for you to visualize, right now, look at me. This image is in root position. Now I'm going to invert it. And here is what I'm going to do to make it look like high G. You see, in high G, I am more compressed than I was in low G, which is still inverted and upside down, but at least you get an idea of what the image looks like. Again, I just want to emphasize that neither is better, it's just they have different effects that you need to be aware of. So far we've covered the sound register and what having different tunings mean when it comes to music theory. But what happens to your technique? Probably and arguably, for you as a beginner, the most important part. In low G, you get a clearer separation between registers like we discussed. So you get a more conventional thumb plays the bass while your fingers play the melody feel to your playing. With high G tuning, because your thumb plays a melodic string, in this case the 4th string, you have more opportunities for creative fingerings that involve a single melody played across treble strings and the bass string. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to play a melody on the low G, starting on my 1st string high C, B flat, A, G, and then F. It's a 5-note melody descending from the high C to the F. Because this is a low G, the only option I have is to play it on these 2 strings, alternating my right hand fingers, assuming I'm not playing those frets higher up the neck. Now I'm gonna play the same melodic line, but on the high G ukulele, starting from the C, ending on the F. But because my 4th string, the string that I use my thumb to play, is a melodic string, I can replace some of the melodic notes on the 1st and 2nd string with the 4th string. So I can start with the high C on the 1st string, B flat on the 4th string, open A on the 1st string, open high G on the 4th string instead of the 3rd fret, and then F. And if you play it in sequence, notice how it resonates more than the low G ukulele. And that's because the melodic notes are spread across 2 strings that I don't stop with my left hand. So you have this resonance, which makes it sound like a harp, which makes it sound really unique. Now let's see what happens if we wanted to create a 2-layer texture where we want the bass to be underneath our melody layer. Now I'm going to play the same melody, but with a sustained bass on the fourth string. And because I have the low G, the note will be an actual bass, played with my thumb as you would idiomatically on a fingerstyle instrument where your thumb plays a bass line. I'm going to sustain this A note while I play the melody. Now, at the very final note, the A was still sounding while the F was played, which results in a minor 6 interval, which is very pleasant to the ear and is part of the F major harmony. But the main thing here is that there's a clear separation between the bass and the melody. Now I'm going to play the same melody, but with the bass note being a melodic note because the fourth string is no longer a bass string. Notice what happens here is that when I play the melody and I get to the open A, it sounds exactly the same as my bass note. So it creates confusion for the listener's ear. It's the same pitch. There's no separation between the registers. And notice that when I get to the end, I don't have an A and an F. I don't have that minor 6 that we got from the low G. What I get is a major third where the F is my lower note and the A is the higher note, which is totally acceptable. The major third is a very beautiful harmony. But what that does is it creates confusion as to how the melody resolves. You can have a descending line from the C to the F, which is what your ears want to hear, but there is that A that happens when you play the bass note on the high G instrument. So which note does the melody end on? We don't know, and that's a beautiful effect, but it might not be the effect that you want in a particular piece, arrangement, or composition. So we discussed about how the tuning can affect which root chords are available to you and how it affects your melodic playing and how you listen for the melody when you play different tunings. Let's discuss how it affects your hands. In other words, your actual playing and technique. In fretboard instruments and fingerstyle specifically, it is common or intuitive for us to think of our thumb as the bass player while our treble fingers play the melody. After all, in free stroke, which is the standard right-hand picking technique for fingerstyle, your thumb plays the fourth string or the lower strings and your fingers play the higher strings. This separation of roles between the thumb and the melodic fingers is further amplified if you understand free stroke and you understand that your thumb goes sideways in one motion while your fingers go inwards towards your wrist in another motion. In other words, it's not the same picking motions for your fingers. In other words, your brain associates each movement with a certain sound or a certain role or a certain logic when it comes to playing fingerstyle arrangements. So to make sure you understand it, your brain registers those physical movements with the sounds they produce. So what happens when you play high G in fingerstyle arrangements? You are going to use your thumb to play the fourth string, except the fourth string is a melodic strings. What happens is that this physical separation of bass and melody, your thumb and treble fingers, gets really blurred and it messes up with your intuition and how your ears are connected to your body. Because when you use your thumb, you're expecting a low sound, except you're not really hearing that, you're hearing a higher sound. And it messes up with the way you envision how to play melodic passages because you can alternate between treble fingers and thumb fingers. So if you're a guitar player or a low G player and you have to transition to the high G, you need to get your brain some time to get used to the fact that your thumb is producing a really high pitch. Guys, as a classical guitarist, this is a lot of fun. Changing your bass string to be a melodic string opens up all sort of possibilities and fingerings that adds a refreshing feel to your playing and technique. If you haven't tried it already, I strongly recommend that you do. I'd have to say that a high G ukulele is a lot cheaper than a Baroque guitar, but it doesn't change the fact that your coordination is a little bit harder and less conventional. And by conventional, I am referring to 500 years plus of history where predominantly composers wrote music in such a way where your treble fingers play the melody and your thumb finger plays the lower register. So overall, from this video, if we put our feelings aside, low G is more appropriate for playing traditional, properly layered fingerstyle arrangement, and high G is more suited for strumming music where you want that shimmery and resonant sound, where playing inverted chords isn't important because your role as a musician is to play the accompaniment between a bass instrument and a singer instrument. And even if there was no bass instrument, you still have the vocal instrument leading or attracting the attention from your audience. So can you play high G tabs on low G? Yes, maybe. Can you play low G tabs on high G? Yes, less maybe. Will they sound the same? No. Will it work all the time? No. Can you get by having just one tuning? Yes, I'd pick low G. Will you be able to play everything you want? No. Will you be able to follow my ukulele fingerstyle basics course with high G? Yes. Will you sound the same as me? No. Should you get 2 ukuleles and have both tunings? Yes, absolutely. This will solve the issue. So this wraps up the first episode of Ukulele Sessions. I am sure I left a few things out, but I want you to let me know what they are and write them in the comment section down below, and let's get a conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single beat of Ukulele Sessions and the upcoming episodes.